This evening, we are very excited to welcome Emma Straub to the bookstore. Ms. Straub is the author of several novels and collections of short stories and essays, including The Vacationers and Other People We Married. Tonight, she will be discussing her latest novel, Modern Lovers, which follows the lives of 3 former bandmates and their 2 teenage children over the course of one summer in Ditmas Park, Brooklyn. As the adults struggle with marital problems, identity crises, and the budding relationship between their teenagers, long-held secrets are revealed and buried tensions come to a head. I'm going to leave it to Ms. Straub to dig deeper into the plot and the highly relatable characters, but suffice to say, it is an incredibly enjoyable read and one of my summer favorites of 2016. Tonight, Ms. Straub will be in conversation with Tayla Burney, a producer at WAMU's The Kojo Nnamdi Show. This special event is part of our WAMU in Your Bookstore series, in which different personalities from our local NPR affiliate station come to local bookstores to participate in events. We've been lucky enough to have Ms. Burney here for book events in the past, and we are thrilled to have her back this evening. So please join me in welcoming Emma Straub and Tayla Burney to Politics and Prose.
Thank you so much for that terribly kind introduction. And I do just want to say this is part of our WAMU in Your Bookstore series, which has been wonderful to work with Politics and Prose on that. And we so appreciate you guys having us back. And Emma, thank you for letting us come and be part of this evening with you.
Thank you for wearing a dress that matches my dress.
So I think that's the first thing we need to talk about, because before we get to the interior of the book, we need to talk about the cover.
Yeah.
You're wearing it, which I love.
I am. I mean, so my sight gag on my book tour is it's slightly problematic because my dress matches my book jacket, but the copy of my book that I bring on my book tour has no jacket. So I always want to hold it up and say look, it looks just like this, but it doesn't look like this because my copy does not have my jacket on it. But yeah, my publisher, as we were just talking about this in the office, my publisher, Riverhead, is really inventive and wonderful, and they do all kinds of crazy things, and they have all kinds of crazy ideas. And they made me these little zippered, sort of like pencil casey bags. Or they didn't make them for me. They made them to send out as promotional items, and I got one. But they sent right. I mean, it was nice of them to give me one too. But when they sent it to me, they sent me an email with the sort of prototype whatever on the website that they were using to make it, which is this company called Print All Over Me. And when I clicked on the link, I realized that this company makes lots of things, and that I could make myself outfits to wear on my book tour that matched the book jacket, which meant that I did not have to think about what I was going to wear. And it's really fun. It's really fun to wear clothing that matches your book jacket.
I mean, if you have the opportunity to do that, why would you not?
Yeah, I know. And people do come up to me often. I would say I get more compliments on I have this dress and then I have a jumpsuit also, and I get more compliments on those than any other item of clothing I have ever worn in my entire life. And it's not like people are coming up to me and saying oh, that's your book jacket. They're just oh, I love your jumpsuit. And I'm like,
there's marketing potential. There's potential.
I know. I didn't even think about I genuinely wasn't even thinking about that. I was really just thinking about how to amuse myself. But it's a win-win situation.
It is a win-win situation. And I will say the contents are as inviting as the cover itself. And there is a trio of couples at the heart of this novel. We've got Elizabeth and Andrew, Zoe and Jane, and Harry and Ruby. For those who've not yet had a chance to read the novel, could you tell us a little bit about them and sort of the ties that bind them all together?
Yes, I can. So when I started writing this book, I thought that it was really about this one couple, Elizabeth and Andrew, who have been married for about 20 years. They're in their late 40s, and they have a 17-year-old son. And Elizabeth is a real estate agent in Brooklyn, and her husband is sort of a little bit of a dilettante. He's got enough family money that he has sort of tried lots of different careers and hasn't quite found one yet. and they live on the same block as their college friend Zoe and her wife Jane. And Zoe and Jane have a restaurant in the neighborhood. And they also have this extremely alluring teenage daughter named Ruby. And so the book really follows Elizabeth and Andrew, Zoe and Jane, and then Harry and Ruby, who have their own little, like, doomed first love story. So I think to say that it's doomed is neither, like, a spoiler nor a bummer, because they're teenagers, and you don't really want teenagers to have a perfect love story, because, like, then
That's not very formative.
Where do you go from there, you know? But yeah, the book is really about how about the two marriages in the book, and then also the friendships specifically between Elizabeth and Zoe, and just how, you know, long marriages are wonderful and certainly important in one's life, if you're lucky enough to have one of those, but that long friendships are equally sustaining and important, and that one of the things that I sort of wanted to get into with this book or think about was that, you know, in a marriage or in a sort of long-term partnership like that, you are sort of forced to talk about things, like, sort of endlessly.
Yeah, and both of these couples, both married couples, are at sort of a friction point.
Right.
Like a sort of a turning point
Yes.
for each of them.
Yes.
In their marriage at the start of the novel.
Yeah.
And I wonder, you know, as I was thinking about the idea of modern marriages, reading the novel, and sort of how we've all redefined the institution to some extent, what can you learn about it at one of those turning points and one of those points of friction that, you know, might otherwise sort of be lost as you think about modern marriage?
I think that, speaking as a person, a married person, who has a 5-month-old baby, like, there are big things that happen in marriages. Having children is one of them. Having those children suddenly seem like they're adults and about to leave the house, that's another one. There are lots of them, of course, in any marriage. But I was interested in looking at marriages at a tricky point, and to see, and unlike my previous books, actually, like when I feel like I'm really ignoring you guys over here. I'm sorry. I'm going to try to remember to swivel both ways. Unlike my previous books, I really didn't know what was going to happen with these characters before I started. When I started writing, it was really just about Elizabeth and Andrew, and then I kept finding myself sort of like peeking in the neighbor's window, in a way that didn't feel creepy, the way that sounds creepy, but it did make me think, oh, like maybe the story is not just about this one family. Maybe it's, maybe I need to give sort of equal page time to both of these families.
In a few minutes, we'll talk a little more about the neighborhood, because I think that's an important part of the story as well. But in addition to, marriage, it's about modern parenting in a lot of ways. And, Harry and Ruby are each sort of like a teenage archetype to an extent. Like, Harry's the kind of go with the flow kid, wants to just get good grades and do right, doesn't even occur to him to like get in trouble. Yeah. Whereas Ruby is like always pushing the boundaries, testing like her parents' trust. So first question I have for you, were you a Ruby or a Harry? I was a Harry.
I have yet to meet anyone who tells me that think that they were a Ruby. I don't think anybody thinks they were. I was a Harry who smoked a lot of cigarettes. I was a really good teenage smoker, like really good, like a pack a day, 14-year-old. I didn't even have to hide it. I don't know. This makes my parents sound terrible, but they're not. Some of you know my parents. They're nice parents, right? But yeah, I don't know. They sort of just let me do, they pretended not to know that I was doing it. And I think they pretended not to know I was doing it because they knew that I was like a good kid, and I always did my homework, and I always went to school early. I mean, like I was not
checking all the other boxes.
I was not in any danger of being like a bad kid. But yeah, I did smoke a lot of cigarettes.
Ruby and Harry share, as you mentioned, sort of a somewhat doomed but really sweet kind of romance, I think, over the course of the summer. And by no means is it chaste when I say sweet. But
no.
What?
Ugh, what would the point of that be?
I mean, that would be kind of boring. But it's really kind of lovely. And what I appreciated about it is that where their parents are sort of opens their eyes to each other in a way. Sort of what was swirling around them that they kind of look at each other and go, hey, you're interesting. Where they had sort of stopped seeing each other in their daily lives for a while.
Well, I think Harry had always kept an eye, or both eyes, on Ruby. But she's a year older than he is, and so I think she was just not paying attention. But yeah, what happens with Harry is that he sees sort of an opening for the first time, and sort of leaps at it despite himself, despite his fear of rejection. But yeah, I mean, I for me, their relationship had as much to do with like, first love as it does with the sort of intense, all-consuming friendship that you also have when you're a teenager, where there's nothing more important in your life. Like, you don't have a job that's pulling you away from your friends. Your friends are your world when you're a teenager. And also the fact that the book takes place in the summertime, I think also lends it this sort of vast, endless quality that is at least how I saw it summers when I was a kid, that like your whole world could change.
Right. There's so much
your
potential
body could look
in that
totally
3
different.
months.
You could be really a different person come September. And I think that's what Harry is going for.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is sort of an interesting time constraint, right? I imagine.
Oh, yeah. No, it was nice. It was nice for me too. Yes. Yeah. Yes, because I was like, okay, here's where it starts and there's where it ends. Yeah, I did have that going in, that I knew that it was
going to be
a summer story.
Awesome. And you mentioned the friendships. Me and Andrew and Elizabeth and Zoe go way back, which I think is a common thing that a lot of people can relate to, right? Like you said, when you're a teenager, your friendships are your everything, and some of those stay with you throughout your whole life. But there's something that's a little bit unique about their friendship and their dynamic as well. Can you tell us what was sort of exceptional about their Oberlin years together?
Yes. So Elizabeth and Andrew and Zoe were close friends when they were at college in Oberlin, Ohio, which is also where I went to college, coincidentally. But they were in a not very good rock and roll band together called Kitty's Mustache, which I was very proud of myself for thinking of, because Elizabeth was an English major, and I don't know how many of you have read War and Peace. You don't need to raise your hand. But I read War and Peace when I was at Oberlin for fun, because that's the kind of kid I was. And you're in a bookstore on a Saturday at 6 p.m., so I'm guessing it might be you too. But whenever I would get to the war parts, I would kind of go and like turn the pages pretty quickly. But then the parties, really. I was there for the parties. They should have called it War and Parties. Because I loved these descriptions, specifically of Kitty, who is almost always described as having a downy little mustache. And so I thought, if I were the kind of girl who had a band in college, I might have called it Kitty's Mustache. But the other important thing about their band was that it really was not a great band, like not destined for stardom. But so the fourth member of their band was a woman named Lydia, who at Oberlin was a sort of a doughy girl from Scarsdale, who couldn't play any instruments. But then she drops out of Oberlin. She moves out. She leaves the band. She moves to New York and refashions herself as a real rock star. And she then records one of the Kitty's Mustache songs, and it becomes this like big smash hit, and that also comes back in the caption of the book.
Impose upon you to read for us the
Oh,
part
sure.
where, because Elizabeth actually writes the song.
Yes.
It's a song that she writes for the band, and she's sort of like struck by this moment of inspiration, also while reading for fun at Oberlin.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a fun passage when she's writing the song, and then it comes back around in the time when we're getting to know these characters.
Yeah. Okay. So okay, I'm gonna sort of jump around a little bit in this little chapter, because it's sort of a long section and I don't want to bore you all. Okay, so it's nighttime, and Elizabeth and Andrew are in their bedroom. It's very hot. Andrew is asleep. Elizabeth is not. Elizabeth was happy in her marriage. She really was. It was just that sometimes she thought about all the experiences she'd never gotten to have, and all the nights she'd listened to the sound of her husband's snores and wanted to jump out a window and go home with the first person who talked to her. Choices were easy to make until you realized how long life could be. It was flattering the way her song had stayed relevant. Some hits aged badly. No one felt that Who Let the Dogs Out accurately described their inner workings. But Mistress of Myself, that's the name of her song, had aged better than most. Pissed off young women, sensitive young men, teenagers of any description, as long as they were angsty, breastfeeding mothers, anyone who had a boss he hated or a lover she wasn't getting enough attention from. The song was applicable in a surprising number of categories. She'd written the lyrics quickly. It was the fall of her sophomore year, and she was sitting in one of the round orange chairs in the school library. Designed in the 1960s, they were called womb chairs because they were deep enough to crawl into, round and cozy, and surely there had been at least one student who had tried to stay in one for 9 months at a time. The insides were upholstered, and it was best not to think about how hard they were to clean. Elizabeth liked to curl up in one of them and read or write in her notebook. Everyone else at Oberlin was all hot and bothered about Foucault and Barthes, but she was more interested in Jane Austen. She was reading Sense and Sensibility for Pleasure, and that's where she saw it. On one of the very last pages, when Eleanor Dashwood was trying to prepare herself from a visit from Edward, with whom she was deeply in love, but who she believed had forsaken her. I will be calm. I will be mistress of myself, Eleanor thought. Okay, I'm just going to go to the next little part there. Elizabeth understood it completely. The desire to be in control, the need to speak the words aloud. No one in St. Paul, Minnesota had truly been her own mistress. Elizabeth's mother and her friends all went to the same hairdresser, shopped at the same stores, sent their kids to the same school. Elizabeth swiveled the chair round so that it was facing the window and opened up her notebook. The song was finished 15 minutes later. She showed the lyrics to Zoe and Andrew and Lydia later that afternoon, and the rest of the song was done by the time they went to bed. The band was called Kitty's Mustache, a hat tip to Tolstoy's heroine. They were regular college kids in love with the idea of their own cleverness. No one had ever thought of anything before. It was the best night of her life to date. Easy.
Thank you so much for reading that. And when we are caught up with the remaining members of the band all these years later, there's this looming question. There's a film company that wants to make a movie about Lydia's life, and the big question is, they've never licensed this song to anybody, are they going to sign the papers? And there's some debate among Elizabeth and Andrew over this question. And you know, what is the tension point there for them, and how does that start to sort of unravel some of their past history and sort of bleed into today for them in a way that I think neither of them expected?
Yeah. Well, I think for Andrew, it's really that, like, so Elizabeth reacts sort of easily and says, yeah. Why wouldn't I say yes? Zoe says, yeah, why wouldn't I say yes? And Andrew is not interested in this at all. And I think it's because he really hasn't moved on. I think he's the one who has the hardest time seeing himself as an adult, as a real adult. And he hasn't sort of found satisfaction elsewhere in his life. And so he really doesn't like the idea of turning over this thing that is like the cool thing that he was a part of in his life, to some ridiculous Hollywood producer. And then there's also some other reasons.
Yeah, there are reasons which you'll have to get the book and read about. And the Hollywood producer is kind of a great character too. She's really sort of ridiculous, as you said.
I did have. I was in California on my book tour last week. Was it last week? Or the week before?
We'll call it last week.
Last week. And I actually had a meeting with some Hollywood producers about this movie, and they thought it was so funny. They were like, "We are not like that, right?" Yeah. And I was like, "No,
no, it's not you. It's just someone you maybe work with."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And the thing I was curious about with Kitty's Mustache, I have an idea of what they sound like in my head. Were you listening to any particular bands as you were writing that sort of influenced what they sound like in your head?
Well, so that's an interesting question, because I was listening to a lot of very early 90s alternative, like Throwing Muses, like The Breeders, Letters to Cleo. Like there are a lot of bands that sort of have this kind of sound. They're not, like, in my head at least, they're not quite as good or as like tough and angular as like Bikini Kill. Like they're not like quite Riot Girl. Mm-hmm. But what's funny what is great for me is that I am a novelist, so I don't actually have to write the song. Right. You've heard the entire song.
Yeah.
I will be calm. I will be mistress of myself. Like that's it.
Need.
That's all we got.
Yeah.
But because I tell you all that the song was this monster feminist anthem.
I hear it in my head.
Then it is so.
Yeah, it is.
A friend of mine who's a musician. Sorry, guys. I'm just like, sorry. I'm going to just tell you this story. A friend of mine who's a musician asked me if he could record it. If he was like, has anyone written the song? Like, can I write the song? And I was like, if you want to write the song, like, I'm not going to stop you. Sure. That sounds great. Yeah. And he did, and it's wonderful.
Can we hear it somewhere? Can we go online?
Where does
it live?
Well, it lives on my telephone, which is in that office. But I love it, and I do actually have it like sort of stuck in my head a lot. But I also don't really want to like put it out there, just because I want everyone to have their own version of it in their head. Like I don't want people to hear the song and be like, oh, well, but that's not what it sounds like, or that's not the like monster smash hit that would rocket this woman to fame and fortune. So it's like I just have it's just for me.
As it should be. I think that's fair. You mentioned that friendship is another really solid theme that runs through this novel, and you actually open the book with a book club, which I thought was a really clever hook for people. And I think it is really challenging to try to make new friends as you get older and sort of navigate your neighborhood. And the neighborhood where these couples live, Ditmas Park, is a real place in Brooklyn, or just on the outskirts of Brooklyn. What are the kind of perils and positives of being close to your neighbors in this area?
Oh, I think it's just positive. I should say I don't actually live in Ditmas Park, but what the reason why I chose Ditmas Park is that it has all of the stuff that you think about when you think about New York and Brooklyn it's right there, all that stuff. But Ditmas Park itself really feels like this little floating island because it's these Victorian houses with really exotic details like porches and garages and driveways, things that elsewhere in the country people are like,
Yeah, that's a house.
yeah, it's a house. But in New York City, it's not like that,
Right.
really, in most places. So, and I liked the idea of having a New York City book that wasn't, that didn't immediately feel like the kind of New York City that is sort of like at the forefront of everyone's sort of collective imagination.
I was thinking about that because gentrification is a huge issue in New York. It's a huge issue here. And Ditmas Park actually kind of reminds me of the neighborhood we're sitting in right now, in that it's not crazy trendy. There's no huge massive shift underway, but sort of like an amplification of the character of that neighborhood is kind of happening as the areas around it are changing way more dramatically.
Right. Yes.
Which came first, the idea or the location? Because it seems like it was a really important thing for you to have.
It was it was the idea. It was the idea, certainly, but I was torn. I mean, because I'm a native New Yorker, and I love New York City, and yet my publishers sometimes get mad at me when I say what I'm about to say, but
We'll never tell.
really there's a camera. But I really did not I was really reluctant to write a New York City book. I was scared of it. I was like, that who needs another book about New York City? Like, yeah. But I think it's because so many of the recent novels, I'm really not going to get myself into trouble and name any of them, but so many recent novels about Brooklyn are written by young people who are who are new to the city, and it's about sort of discovery and like 20-year-olds. Sure. And I thought, well, maybe if my book is about people who are really like well in the midst of their lives in New York City, in a kind of neighborhood that doesn't feel like an episode of Seinfeld or an episode of Girls or any other Sex in the City. I don't know, sure. Whatever. I can only think of TV shows, clearly. Well, then I could sort of have more fun with it, and I did. I mean, and part of the fun this time actually really came from feeling like I could write about a place because I knew the jokes. Like I know it well enough that I can recognize what's funny about it and what's ridiculous. Yeah. In addition to what's beautiful.
Yeah. No, it comes across really well, and I feel like I could walk the streets of that neighborhood now and be like, oh, this is really familiar. Like I know this place. And I think that's always
it's a very small neighborhood too, though. So you really could. You could cover it all.
Maybe I'll have to next time I'm in New York. One of the other things that I find really interesting about your characters in this book, and to some extent in The Vacationers as well, they're financially comfortable. You mentioned that Andrew has a trust fund, and Zoe's parents bought her house for her. They were sort of celebrities in the disco era, which was really fun. I have like a picture of them in my mind too. And I wonder if you find that writing characters who aren't sort of stressed out about that factor in their life either sort of allows you to amplify other issues, or if it sort of adds an element, because there are some tension points around the parents who've endowed this trust fund. I mean, I was just wondering about that sort of role of their level of comfort.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people ask me about this a lot with The Vacationers. Which I thought was funny because, like, in The Vacationers, like, both of all of the adults had like real jobs, and I don't know. It didn't seem that crazy to me. Like they were going on a sort of extravagant vacation, but it was like for like a very big. I don't know. It didn't seem that crazy to me. And with this one, I don't know. I mean, like, it is true that the characters aren't stressed out about money, but money, it does sort of factor into the plot. So I think that, I don't know, there is an awareness of money and privilege in the book. And yeah, I mean, for me, it was like Andrew, who is the the only character who really has never had to worry about money, it's sort of destroyed him. I mean, it's, you know, he's the one who's suffering the most, and it's because he never actually had to get a job.
And so this is something that I appreciate in novels about people who have money, is that idea that I think for those of us who maybe don't have a trust fund, speaking from personal experience, you know, it's always sort of fascinating to me to see like that it is not all it's cracked up to be, perhaps. And I think that's why I was asking, is that that does it add sort of more stress? And Andrew does start to make some potentially seriously questionable choices around money, which again, you'll all have to read about. But you know, you start to worry a little bit for him and sort of where the family's going, and the potential for them to lose that safety net. So this is one of the last questions I have. So if you all have questions, start thinking about them, making your way to the microphones over here, over there. But you know, when this book published, I got a note from you via Goodreads.
Oh.
It was great. Thank you for that. And I got it
welcome.
because I had read The Vacationers.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, it was not directly to me personally, to be clear. But, you know, it ended with the lines that I appreciated. It's a funny book, I hope, and it is, and a true one. It's got music and food and lots of kissing. I hope you'll check it out, which, again, y'all should, because it's all true. But what I appreciated and what sort of struck me about that was the idea that it's true. Because I think that fiction, one of the things I love about fiction, sort of above all other forms, is that it can amplify great truths about life. And, you know, what for you is the appeal in writing fiction and sort of getting at those truths?
Well, I mean, I don't know. You know, it's confusing to me that more people don't understand exactly what you just said. But I mean, to me, the idea of writing an essay, like a nonfiction essay or a memoir, God forbid, is sort of terrifying. I mean, I have written I have written many essays, but I really would be scared to write an essay that was as deep and as personal to myself and to my like inner like fears and hopes and dreams than my fiction. I mean, I think fiction is magic, both as a writer and a reader. I mean, I think that I am so much more able to go there in fiction than I am in nonfiction. I don't know if it's, I mean, if this goes back to the idea of me being like a good kid and like a good daughter. Sure. But yeah, it's so much easier for me. And I mean, actually, in a funny way, speaking about being a good daughter, I now actually feel like now that I have children that like, I just like turned up the volume so much in my fiction because now like I realized just recently, like just while I was writing this book, which was not very long ago, that like my primary spot in life has changed. Like that before I am a wife and a daughter and a sister, but now I'm also a mother to two human children, not just my irritating cats, but like two actual human children, and that I there's nothing for me to hold back anymore. Like that I don't like I'm not in like the practice phase anymore. Like I don't have time.
Yeah, you're not messing around.
I'm not messing around anymore, which, you know, it's funny. Like, there's a lot more sex in this book than in my previous books. And I think in some ways I'm like, well, I've given birth and like so many more people have seen me naked, you know, in that setting, not in all settings. But I don't know. I just feel like the veil is off. Like I am like an adult woman.
Yeah.
And
Let's do this.
do this.
Well, I appreciate it as a reader.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I should also say, just so the Goodreads note. So my publisher asked me to write this note that would be sent to all the people on Goodreads who had put my books on their shelf or rated my books. I'm not sure. And the first draft of it I wrote while at the airport. I was going to a friend's wedding near here, actually, in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I was the officiant. And I was
weddings?
I did wedding. Okay. I did one wedding. But I was wearing my baby and I was like swaying back and forth and I was eating a Snickers bar for lunch and I was like, okay, I can do this right now. And I like wrote this letter for Goodreads and my publisher said in the most polite way possible, Emma, can you make this like 75% less crazy? So I'm glad that
it worked.
Okay.
I mean, the revisions worked. And it was really very, I thought, charming move, and I really loved the novel. And as mentioned, if you guys have questions, make your way to the microphones. I could keep asking questions all evening, but Emma does have a train to catch eventually, and we got to get your book signed.
Clearly, I can also just babble about just about anything.
We can keep going. Actually, I do have one question for you.
Yes.
That harkens back to the vacationers.
Yes.
I'm about to go on vacation with my in-laws.
Yeah.
Whole family. Uh-oh. Whole fam. Yeah. 8 adults.
Yeah. And it's a terrible idea.
5 kids.
It's a terrible idea.
It wasn't my idea. But I'm going.
Yeah.
14 to 2, age range on the kids. Any advice?
Where are you going?
We're going to the Hamptons, so like I can't complain because we're going to the Hamptons.
And will you have access to an automobile or a bicycle?
Yes,
or
we're bringing our car. There was some debate.
Okay.
I was like,
so
no,
you'll be fine.
We're bringing
you'll be
a vehicle.
Fine. As long as you have a parachute, you'll be fine.
An escape route. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. The other thing that I was wondering about, what are you reading this summer? Because I do think this is sort of a perfect summer read. I'm always curious what authors are reading.
Well, right now,
do you have time to read it?
No, I don't have time at all, except for right now when I'm traveling a little bit without my bebés. And I am about halfway through the new Ann Patchett book that doesn't come out until the fall. It's called Commonwealth. It's really good. And see, this is my favorite thing about being a writer who is also like on Twitter some of the time is that I when I know things are out there in the world, I like complain loudly and then somebody sends it to me. So someone posted that about the new Maria Semple book.
Oh yes,
Where'd
I saw
you go,
that
Bernadette?
Late last week too, and
I was like, and I was like, where do I get it? Where do I get it? And they're sending it to me. So
you're really good. Well played. Hello.
So I think you kind of talked about this, about the location of the book, but your last 2 were really fun, exotic locations. Was this as fun to research?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I didn't have to get on an airplane. There was no like taking like a golf cart around a Hollywood studio this time, which was fun, and there was no going to Spain. But it made it a lot easier. And there's a restaurant in Ditmas Park that was sort of my model for the restaurant in the book, if only for like, I don't know, it's sort of space, like the layout. And it did mean that I got to go there a lot and eat their French fries. So
I read
research.
Another interview too where you said you were going to open houses.
Oh yeah, no, but that wasn't even research. That was just we were moving, and so I was going in and out of a lot of houses in Ditmas Park, which really actually was research because
it can be fun because people have weird
it can be
stuff
really
in their
fun.
houses.
Oh yeah, into that. Over here.
Hi. I really, first of all, I really love the caftan and the
Thank
jumpsuit.
you.
I was like, which is she gonna wear?
Oh yeah, I thought you guys were more of a move
because it's on. You put on your Instagram when you wear.
Really good because it's just a square. oh, sorry. Nice. Thank you. I feel like Vanna White.
So, my question, and I don't know if this is a super softball question or not, but you're super quippy in your writing. Like, you always have little jokes. Like, the one that comes to mind is, like, Elizabeth being drunk on the porch of the beach house and, like, moving her hands and flinging a fork into the bushes. And you just made a quip about, like, you weren't naked everywhere. So I'm just wondering, like, when you were writing, did those just come to you? Or do you
I mean, if I had to think about them, I'd really be in trouble.
So did they just come to you, or do you sort of like visualize the characters doing those things?
I mean, I guess I mean, they don't come to me in any other way than any of the rest of the sentences. You know, like they just. I mean, it does come from the characters, I think. Yeah, but not in it. Like I don't like have like a separate like list of jokes.
You try to fit in.
You could start doing stand-up on the side if you did.
Yeah.
Hello. One of the things that attracted me to come to your presentation this night was if I understood it correctly, in the description of your book, you discussed the parents relating to the children as the children are going through the sort of maturing processes that the parents experience.
Yeah.
And could you give an example of that, please? That what really intrigued me to come in tonight.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one way that I like to describe the book is that it's about what happens when parents realize that they're not the cool ones in the house anymore. And in this case, it's because, well, I don't know. I'm apparently not in your house. That's great. But the parents are being forced to deal with a sort of simultaneous reckoning of the fact that their children are suddenly sexually active, and then also that this stuff about their college lives is coming back because of this movie producer and this song. And so they're also forced to think about themselves as 20-year-olds. And suddenly they're sort of having these things side by side, like they're, 17, 18-year-old children, and then they're themselves at 20.
Are these flashbacks?
Well, I mean, there are some scenes of them in college, yeah. But that it's, they're having to think about their children suddenly having the same kind of sort of agency and individuality and flubs as they did. Like their children aren't just sort of kids anymore where they can say, dinner's at 6, you go to bed at 8, whatever, this is what you're going to wear to school. That they have to sort of take into account that their kids are going to behave in ways that they wouldn't want them to. And it's not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi.
I finished the book just 2 days ago, so I was so thrilled that you were here, and I really enjoyed it. I first want to thank you for the perfectly named character, Dust, which is really one of the best named characters I've ever read. And so I'm trying not to give anything away for people who haven't read it, but one thing you said intrigued me, that when you started the book, you didn't really know where it was heading necessarily. You hadn't plotted it out, but you do at the end kind of tell what happens to people down the line. So I was wondering, when in the process did you figure that out, and what made you decide to do that rather than just end it where you could have ended it? Would have been great.
Yeah, it's so it's so funny. So my father is a writer who writes very different kinds of books than I do. He writes big, very scary books. But he reads everything I write. And when I gave him this, it was already in a galley, and he said, "Emma, it's the best thing. It's the best thing you've ever written. It's the best thing you've ever written. The only problem is the ending." And I was like, "Dad, it's too late. It's too late. I can't change it. And I really like the ending." And so I it's been very gratifying for me whenever, like, there have been several reviews that talk about how much they like the ending, and then I just forward those right to my dad. But yeah, so in the ending, this is not a spoiler at all. But the last section in the book is sort of a series of clippings from different publications and places that sort of gives you like little snapshots of what happens to the characters as they move forward. I didn't know that I wanted to do that until very late in the book, and it was partially because I like them so much that I didn't want to let go of them. But it was also just because I was really curious, and that I wanted not like a bow, but I wanted satisfaction. Like I wanted to feel like everyone was really okay. Not in a like, and then they renewed their vows kind of way. That does not happen. But and not to say that I wanted all the marriages to be intact or that I wanted anything sort of really pat. But I did want to feel like everyone was all right. And I saw the possibility for humor. And so I couldn't resist. Oh, yeah, no. This is purely selfish.
It's a nice like nudge forward for everybody. It's like you're sort of pushing them out and saying, "Look, there they go."
Yeah.
I loved it too. So you can tell your dad.
I will.
We're all like on
I'm
the
keeping
same
a
page with it.
tally.
I think we have time for one more question. So
Awesome. I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this, but you've got these two generations with like Andrew and Elizabeth and Zoe, and then Ruby and Harry. And I was wondering, like, where do you see the emotional heart of the novel? Like, which set of characters? And, like, or maybe just, like, which one did you relate to more, like, see more of yourself in?
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of them, really. Like, that's something that I didn't know. I mean, when I started, as I said, like, it really started with Elizabeth for me. And with her marriage and her children, her child, and her friendship, but then very quickly I realized how much I loved everyone else, and so I couldn't just sort of stay close to her. And I mean, there's certainly a lot of me in all of these characters, but one thing I did with this book that I feel very aware of is that there are the teenagers. I was once a teenager, it's true. And then there are the parents who are, nearing 50. And then there's a really big, nice, open field in between them where I am. And I think that's because it's easy for me to write about being a teenager because I was there and I'm not there anymore. And it's also easy for me to write about parents of big, sort of nearly grown up children because I'm not there yet, because I'm so far away from that. And I think if I tried to write a book that was about like a woman in her mid-30s with small children, it would be sort of a disaster because I have no distance from this kind of zone. So yeah, so to me, it's got two hearts, to answer your question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Emma, thank you so much for coming to DC.
My pleasure.
This has
Thank
been so
you.
much fun. And I know books are for sale behind.